Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about compound interest and how to calculate it. So, what makes compound interest different from simple interest is that compound interest calculates not only the interest on the original principal that we borrowed or invested, but it also calculates interest on previous interest that has been accrued. And luckily for investors, compound interest is the actual type of interest that we use in real life. Simple interest is merely a concept in a lot of ways, rather than an actual reality of life. So here is the equation for compound interest. A represents the future value of the investment or loan, including the interest. So A is going to be the total amount with the principal and interest accrued overall. P is the initial principal amount that is invested or that's loaned out. R is the annual interest rate as a decimal. N is the number of times the interest is compounded per year, because if the interest is compounded more often than once per year, then we need to account for that and divide by the number of times that it actually is compounded. Then T is the number of years that the money is invested or borrowed for. So let's move on to example one and talk about how we would do it. It says if you invest $1,000 at an annual interest rate of 6% compounded annually, how much will the investment be worth after 5 years? So, first thing I'm going to do is just write down what was given here. So, what was given in this situation? Well, what we were given was that P, the original principal that we invested, was $1,000. The annual interest rate is 6%, which recall that when we write the rate, we want to write the decimal form. So the decimal form of 6% is 0.06. As a quick reminder for how we get from percentage to decimal, we take where the decimal is here and we move it over by 2 places because a percentage essentially is just a fraction out of 100. Then we need to know the number of compounding periods per year. So in this case, because it's compounded annually, that means once per year. So n would just be 1 in this particular scenario. And then how much will the investment be worth after 5 years? Means that the t, the time, is 5 years or 5. So now I'm going to write down the equation. The overall amount is equal to p times 1 plus r over n to the power of t n. Now I'm going to plug in all these values and then solve for A. So A is equal to 1,000 times 1 plus 0.06 over 1 to the power of 5 times 1. Now I'm going to simplify a couple things. I'm going to simplify what's in the brackets first of all. I'm going to say, well, 1 plus 0.06 over 1 is the same as 1.06, and then 5 to the power of or times or to the power of 5 times 1. Well, 5 times 1, that's just 5. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my calculator, and it is customary to get a calculator for financial problems like this, or just in general for for anything related to statistics or related to finance. It's customary to get a calculator. So then I'm going to type into my calculator 1.06 to the power of 5. I'm going to hit equals, and then I'm going to multiply that value by 1,000 to get that A is equal to $1,338, and I'm going to round up to 23 cents. And so, therefore, in terms of how much the investment is worth after 5 years, it is worth $1,338.23. So, I'm going to write that in my conclusion statement that, therefore, the investment is worth $1,338.23 after 5 years. So 1,000 of that is the initial money we put in, and then the other $338.23 is either interest accrued on the initial principal or interest accrued on previous interest that was accrued other years as well. Let's do a second example. How long will it take for an investment of $2,000 to double if it earns a compound interest rate of 8% per year? Now, it didn't say how often this is compounded, and so I'm going to assume that it is compounded once per year because they didn't specify compounded monthly or compounded weekly or compounded semi-annually or quarterly or anything like that. So I will assume it is compounded once a year because they did not specify otherwise, and that's our default. So I'm first going to write what's given here. So what is given in this case is that the initial principal is $2,000. The future amount that we want, A, is going to be $4,000. Even though this wasn't explicitly given, they want to know how long it will take for the amount to double. They want to know how long will it take for us to get from $2,000 to $4,000 overall. And so, therefore, because 2,000 times 2 is 4,000, we could assume that the amount we're looking for is 4,000. Then the annual interest rate is R is equal to 0.08. We're going to assume that N is 1 because they didn't specify otherwise. They didn't say that it was compounded more than once per year. And then the thing that we're looking for is T. T is what we do not know in this situation. So I'm going to write all this in, and then we'll be good to go. So we know that the original equation is that A is equal to P times 1 plus R over N to the power of N times T. That means that 4,000 is equal to 2,000 times 1 plus R over N, so that's going to be 0.08 to the power of N times T, so 1 times T, which is just T. Then if I divide both sides by 2,000, I get that 2 is equal to 1.08 to the power of t. Now, if we were in grade 11 math, I would say we should use logarithms and get an exact value for this. However, logarithms will not be introduced until grade 10 or 11, and this is middle school math. So for middle school math, it is good enough to just do some trial and error to type in 1.08 to various powers until we get one that gives us 2 or as close to it as possible to get the correct number of years. So I'm going to try 1.08 to the power of 10. That gets me 2.15, which is a little bit high, so I'm going to try a little bit lower. 1.08 to the power, let's try to the power of 9. That is 1.999, which is going to round up to 2. So I'm going to say, therefore, that t is equal to 9, because when I type in 1.08 to the power of 9, I get 1.999, which is basically 2, essentially. And so, therefore, it will take 9 years to double the investment. As always, feel free to leave any comments or questions you have down in the comment section, and we'll see you for the next one.